clear, authentic marketing is the best way to grow your business. I am your host, Tynan Allan, and I'm so happy that you've joined us. Well, welcome to the first full episode of the At Heart Branding Podcast. I'm so glad that you've joined us. Again, my name is Tynan Allan, and I'm going to be your host on this journey. So the first episode that we are going to be doing in this series, the first actual episode that is going to be about the spirit of your brand. As I mentioned in episode 0, we are going to be walking through the entire At Heart brand clarity process. And that means walking through every single step that we take all of our clients through, just so that you can get a bit of a better idea of how you yourself can clarify your marketing and create a more cohesive brand so that you can connect with your customers that much better and help you, at the end of the day, increase sales and your bottom line. So first, we're going to talk about the brand's spirit. And you may be asking, what is a brand spirit? Really, what it is the heart of your brand. And from an internal perspective, really, this is the foundation of why your business exists and how it is going to change the world. True to its name, this section clarifies really the true spirit of your brand. And really, the brand spirit is made up of 4 pillars. The why, the superpower, really what makes you different than anybody else, the perfect customer identification, so who is your perfect customer that you are talking to, and the last is your core principles. And this is a little bit deeper than core values. It's about really what are the principles that run your organization, and what do you really stand for? What are you really trying to achieve? Those are really your core principles. So those are the top 4 pillars, really, of the brand spirit. It's the why, the superpower, the perfect customer, and the core principles. And I'm really excited to dig into the importance of the brand spirit with my guest today, Tynan Allan. As the founder of Culturing and the Culturing podcast, Tynan Allan is on a mission to improve the experience at work for 1 million people. With a focus on company culture, strategy, and transformation, Tynan and his team share the resources and tools needed to build workplaces that people love and can do work that is meaningful to them. Founding his first company at 23 years old, Illuminate, Tynan has worked with organizations in Denmark, Germany, the UK, Canada, and the US, and has even represented Canada in Berlin as G20 Young Entrepreneur Delegate. You can tune into his show, the Culturing Podcast, for the latest from pioneering leaders on how they build stellar company cultures and how you can do the same. I really enjoyed my interview with Tynan. He's an amazing, amazing guy. And we talked a lot about the importance of the brand spirit and its implementation within your company culture. Really, at the end of the day, your company culture is the heart of your organization, and the spirit of your brand is the heart of your spirit. And the two of those really go hand in hand, and Tynan and I talk about that. I think it's really interesting, the parallels between company culture and the brand spirit and how they really are, at the end of the day, the same. So I'm going to stop blabbering by myself, and without further ado, here is my interview with Tynan Allan. Well, Tynan Allan, thank you so much for being actually the very first guest on the At Heart Branding Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're here. So I know a little bit about your story, but why don't you share with our listeners kind of what your journey has been like into helping companies really make their culture that much better?
Yeah, well, I don't have the right background. You know, I didn't follow a conventional path to where I am, and a lot of people don't, right? But I was really fascinated by workplace cultures because I often didn't have the best leaders. And I've always been someone that really likes leadership. People have told me for a long time, I have like natural leadership abilities.
Right.
And I thought kind of critically of a lot of leaders, not in a way of they're bad people, but just more like I sort of realized over time, a lot of leaders, a lot of managers aren't properly given the tools to manage and lead their people well. Mm-hmm. And I would hear this from stories that my friends would tell me, or I would hear this from, my own experiences of working with my managers. So I started out as a health coach. I was working with executives because I had a natural kind of this leadership ability. All of the other coaches around me or personal trainers would be afraid of like a vice president of a big oil company.
Right.
And I'd be like, oh, they're just a normal person. Sure,
yeah.
I'll take them on.
Yeah.
And again, had no thought that I would end up in this. I actually thought I was going to be like a doctor. I did my degrees in like health and exercise physiology, and I did cancer research for 4 years.
Really? There you go.
So totally unrelated.
Yeah.
But I realized that I could sort of, when I was talking to these executives, and you can only talk about eating broccoli and doing push-ups so much, and then you kind of have to talk about life.
Yeah. And
we would talk about their journeys as, leaders and what their problems were with their teams and how this was such a big part of what they thought about. And over time, I sort of put my research hat back on, wasn't about cancer anymore. It was about culture. And at first, I don't even think I even had those words. I wasn't talking the company culture language.
Right.
But I started to research it, and I started to go and read a bunch of articles. And I'd come back and say, hey, I read this. What if you tried this to solve that problem you described to me last week? Mm-hmm. And again, I had one-on-one time with major executives at major companies in Calgary that like people would die for. Right. And I met with them every week. And so I got to talk to them and talk through these things with them. And eventually, like, long story short, sorry for taking so long.
No, it's so good.
But it is sort of weird. People like do ask me that. I don't necessarily get a chance to share that.
Yeah.
I am the first to put up my hand to say I'm unqualified for this. Like, I'm not the right person for this job, as my resume might say. But it did come so organically that it's so natural to me now. Right. That I'm like, I arrived here, like it just happened, that it kind of can't be an accident.
Right.
And so, I had a VP at a big oil and gas company say, hey, if you started your own company doing this, we would be able to bring you on to do some work with us.
Right.
And it never amounted to like this crazy project where I got paid millions of dollars. That would have been nice.
Not yet,
maybe, but my first project was to help guide a VP at an oil and gas company through some of his assessment of company culture.
Right.
And that is sort of this, that's the key thing for me. And as we talk about, some of the things, kind of the theme of today's podcast is kind of that spirit of a brand, right? That is your culture.
Yeah.
That is what people, your customers sense about you, but also what the people that work for you experience.
Right.
And for a long time, people believed, and this is what I was learning, people believed that culture couldn't be assessed. We couldn't measure it. It was this thing fluffy in the clouds that was super out of reach, intangible, and just existed.
Right.
And I slowly, again, I came from that data research background. I was like, I'm going to challenge that. I think we can measure it. I think there are things we can do to assess it and determine, are we on track or are we off? And we can actually change the narrative if the spirit is off, so to speak.
Right.
So that's sort of how I arrived to today, working for about 5 years now in the company culture, human capital kind of transformation space.
That is really, really cool. I love the story, how it wasn't necessarily a target that you had, that you wanted to reach, right? It was an authentic,
exactly.
Natural growth, which is really cool. And like you mentioned, this whole first season of the At Heart Branding podcast, we're wanting to speak to each part of the process that we walk clients through, and speak with people that are experts in certain fields. And honestly, that first step, like you mentioned, is the spirit of the brand. And I think I really identified that as a core, really the heart of a brand. It's your people, and it's the way that it's the values and the way in which they communicate to the end customer, and the spirit within the organization. And I'm really interested what some of the biggest problems that you see when you start working with a new client. I'm interested to see kind of what the most common problems that you see some of these organizations have when when you start working with them?
Yeah, well, I like the word spirit. I mean, I'm a pretty spiritual guy. And, you know, there's many avenues somebody could take to understand even their own spirit, you know, and that's such a funny word, right? Sometimes, or it can be so also kind of that fluffy word, right? Culture, spirit, these are kind of conventionally fluffy words, but, you know, something that I look to often is like, I mean, even in the ancient book, the Bible, it talks about like how there's fruits of the spirit. So you have the spirit, but then you have the fruits of it. And it's sort of like, how do you recognize if it's the spirit or not? And it's sort of like in the Bible, it talks about like it's love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control. Faithfulness, I think is the last one. And so I apply that to company culture. And I think we should apply that to our brands, right? We have to know that against this criteria, does it line up? Are we seeing that? And so the thing that I often talk about and what I see in a lot of companies is that what we actually will do is we'll have an outline in our heads of what that culture or the spirit looks like, but we won't actually see if it's like coming, if the fruit exists, right? So say somebody says in their company, we believe in having a transparent company, right? Or say it's a brand value, right? It's like, we believe that our brand exists to, you know, create optimism for our customers or spark joy in our customers, right? And it's sort of like, but what's the fruit of that? Like, do you know that is happening? How are you knowing if it's happening or not? And often
like, how are you measuring?
Like, what's the measurement? And so then that's what I often have to encourage people to do. Well, how are you checking if this is happening, right? And maybe it's going really granular, and it's saying every manager should be assessed whether or not the culture that you see on a big scale for your company is happening on that micro scale of the manager and the 5 people they manage, right? If those 5 people all come back to you and after you've assessed them, maybe it's through a questionnaire or whatever, and you're coming back and saying, actually, our manager they're not ever transparent with us, right? We've actually never been told this set of data. Like, we've actually never been, you know, coached. We've actually, you know, only once a year does our manager give us feedback. And you're like, well, we're a feedback culture and we're a transparent culture. Well, then it's not happening.
You have to walk the walk, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so again, we do have this thing that I often try and lead people to this is, as leaders in your company, and again, you can totally apply this to your brand as in like the customer facing side of your culture. That's sort of how I see it, right? The internal is like how we refer to the company culture, and the brand is just sort of the external culture.
For sure.
Like what your people outside of your organization see. And so again, it's like all the things that you think as a leader, are they actually happening? And is it just your perceived version of it, or is it the real version of it?
For sure. And I think for us, like I always say to every single client that almost the golden rule in branding specifically is consistency. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the same with company culture, right? Like, as a leader, you need to be consistent and you know, stay true to your word. Like, that's one of the biggest things, right? We're dealing with things that are intangible too, but at the end of the day, they manifest into tangible outcomes. Right. And
I think for a long time, again, I think there are such similarities between internal culture and brand. And I think about it as like they're key stakeholders, right? Brand is your customers,
for sure.
Internal is your employees. But these both stakeholder groups have a rising expectation of greatness, right? For a long time, customers were okay with like shitty products or a shitty brand or like bad marketing or like a crappy logo or a bad website. But now the standards are higher. And it's similar in organizations where the spirit of an organization, the culture of an organization, people used to show up to work and it used to be a terrible environment to go to. But now we don't accept that anymore. We don't accept that, oh, this is just my 9 to 5 and it's fine if like I get treated like crap and whatever my company said I was going to be, the environment I was going to be working in when I got hired and was on the careers website, oh, it doesn't really line up anymore, but I'm fine with it. No, people aren't fine with it anymore. And they will stand up. They will leave. Just like a customer will leave if the brand experience isn't good. You won't get that conversion from your website. If your website looks like garbage, you won't get a person that stays with your company, and you can't retain a customer the same way you can't.
Which at the end of the day, it affects your bottom line, right? You're either like hiring, and the turnover can be one of the greatest expenses for any company. But you speak to that, and I think within our process, within that spirit, one of the biggest and most important things within that section of the process is the why statement. And I think, the why is so important, not only as individuals, but as an organization, and communicating that. What kind of impact do you see within organizations that don't necessarily have a clear why?
Yeah, I think today, in today's day and age, and in the business climate of today, I actually think most people have nailed this. Some struggle, but I would say that on average, most people have a values. They have values. They have a vision. They have a mission statement. But what I would almost say now, like the next 5 years, it's not just the why statement, it's the why statement. And so what I mean to say, and people can like Google this. I don't know how I stumbled upon it, but I thought it was really interesting. And basically Elon Musk designed characteristics that he looks for in his SpaceX employees or astronauts. So I stumbled upon this thing. I can share it. We can share it if you want to send the link or whatever to the listeners. But on one side, it's a 2-column chart. And on one side, it says, like, here's a characteristic of this astronaut. We want them to be diligent and focused.
Okay.
And then what it does is it breaks it down even more. So maybe that one person's why, let's say, is, they're the behind the scenes. What we believe is that we do this because of this.
Right.
But then it's saying we do this because of this on the other side of the column, and it has like 8 sentences like clarifying that statement. So if I go back to the earlier example I gave about transparency, well, if you say one of our core values is transparency, well, you and I have a different definition of what transparency is. You might believe that transparency is that everyone's salaries, from CEO to the person that works the front desk,
everybody should know.
Everyone knows everything.
Right.
And some companies believe that is the definition of transparency.
Right.
Some people just think they need a yearly report that says, like, are we doing well or not?
Right.
And that's transparent to them. And so what I mean to say is, like, the why behind the why, that's what I'm trying to get at, is that it's actually going deeper and further defining it so you also can measure against it, right? Because if you say that we're transparent, then what you can do is you can sort of get away with having transparency, but it's not really what you wanted, right? So if you wanted transparency to look like employee, earnings are shared, stock, performance is available, like all of these things that could be transparency. If you want that, you have to say that,
right?
Or else you can't say, did we do that or not? Right. And it's similar in this astronaut example. It's like you could find an astronaut that's really focused, but how are you going to measure if they're focused or not?
For sure.
Here's these 10 things that say this is how we will know. Are we delivering? This is sort of, again, this is the fruit of what that will look like.
Right. And I think that was a big shift in our process too, was it started, the core principles section was core values.
Yeah.
And then honestly, having gone through the process myself and going through, I'm like, it just seems empty.
Yeah.
Right. Throwing out transparency and trust as a core value. It's like, well, duh.
Well, and
right.
That's the other thing too, right? Today, again, with that rise in expectation from customers or from your employees, people know that actually now everyone has them, right? Everyone thinks their brand should be honest.
Right.
Everyone thinks that the brand, if you're going to the grocery store and you're buying products, everyone sort of assumes that hopefully the brands I'm buying from are honest, they value integrity.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what's going to make you different? You have to get more specific.
We'll be right back with our interview with Tynan Allan in just a minute. Hey, it's Brighton here. I'm only going to interrupt the interview for a short minute. If you're listening to this podcast because you feel that your marketing dollars are not going as far as they should, you're not getting the return on investment as they should, and you really need to up your brand and marketing game, I've got a little freebie that I want to share with you. It's called the 5 Secrets That Marketing Agencies Don't Want You to Know. It's a really high value, high impact free PDF that you can download from our website at heart.co. So we dig into some of the tips and tricks and strategies that we use with our clients to help them up their marketing game and clarify their brand and clarify their marketing. So if you're tired of spending money and wasting it on marketing that doesn't work, take the time to visit atheart.co. That's atheart.co. Scroll about 3/4 of the way down, and you're going to see a form that you can fill out to download this free PDF. So if you're tired of wasting marketing dollars, take the time, go to the website, download the free PDF. I promise you'll be glad you did. Thanks so much. Let's get back to the interview. Well, it's different and it's actionable. I think that's where we flip from core values, which are one word kind of like you said, ambiguous meanings behind those words, to those core principles of like what are the actionable things that you are going to do that separates you from everybody else, and how are you going to implement that through your entire organization, right? So it's interesting, the SpaceX example. I hadn't heard about that, so I'm interested to see what
if
what
you're
Elon
looking
has to
as
say.
a founder to say like, this is what an example of how I could really define my values. It just might just be something to look at to trigger, what could this really look like? Because I think people do struggle to make it is kind of a big leap from coming up with just words that resonate with you to ways in which those are going to be more specific. Yes. That's harder. It's harder work.
Absolutely.
And so, I guess that kind of speaks to another thing I see in terms of, like you asked, like, what do I see in company cultures? Well, I see a lot of laziness.
Right.
I see a lot of companies that tick the box. They have, on their careers website, they say, this is what we believe in. This is the culture. And then you see, as you look a little deeper under the hood, like there's a lot of people that are just like lazy about this stuff. They don't get specific enough about it. They sort of assume, again, you say it's like about a bottom line issue, right? Well, again, if you sleep on this stuff, if you think to yourself that, we can't possibly take enough time out of our day to, once a quarter do a survey of our employees, that we couldn't imagine taking our employees out of their jobs. It's sort of like, well, if that's the way you're thinking about it, like I can understand, because it's obviously your employees are doing valuable things, but the cost of that is that you actually have, 50% of your employees looking for other jobs, and you don't even know it. Yeah. Because you're not addressing what's concerning them. Right. And similarly, I think to brand, it's like you don't even know that your current customers are currently looking for your competitors and trying to see, is what I have in your brand, in this product that I'm buying, in this service that I'm getting from your brand, could I get better elsewhere? Well, and don't give them any reason to go look.
Well, and it's looking for alternatives based on your internal beliefs, right? And your internal values, and I mean, it's for me, like my goal is to make sure that the clients that I work with, they're focusing on authentic marketing too. I think there's a big disconnect out there with the mechanics behind social media and the mechanics behind marketing and what's effective and what's going to drive results, and leaving behind literally the spirit of what's the actual substance of what you are marketing and what are you actually saying, right? And I think that's why I love this conversation of bringing those two together, because the authenticity starts at the core of the business with the people that are working there, right? And then it trickles out into the marketing department, which then trickles out all the marketing and everything too,
and that's
right?
Why I love to, like, again, I see this too, because now even in a role I'm working in part-time, I'm an advisor to a company, and it's actually a sort of a conversions marketing live chat audio video company. And so now I'm actually on my, day to day, both working on the employee experience as well as the customer experience.
Right. So you're seeing both sides.
So I'm seeing this bridging, and that word experience is important because I think it speaks to, again, if we go to like, the grandiose like concept of spirit, spiritual, it's sort of like, well, if you look in history of anything like spiritual, it's all based on an experience that someone had.
Absolutely.
Right. It's weird. If you look in, even again, we take the church context. Well, a lot of the time people stop going to church because they don't have an experience with the Holy Spirit, let's say, or you're like, oh, this is just now a religion. And it's just something I'm doing for no reason. Yeah. I need an experience.
Well, it's almost the conversation of what's in it for me.
Yeah.
Right. Like
totally.
Like it's and it is.
I don't want to follow someone else's book. I'm not going to. People don't go blindly into things anymore. Yeah. You need to capture them with an experience. And so we see this with our employees. You have to capture them with their employee experience, and employee experience is sort of defined as 3 pillars of employee experience now. It's sort of like your culture, your technology that your employees use, and then your physical space, right? And so if you kind of take that into the customer experience side, it's sort of like, what is the technology that they're interfacing with? What is sort of like the environment that your product exists in? And then what is, again, that brand spirit side of things? So I just really find it interesting that a lot of people aren't considering the experience of it, and I think we're adapting too slowly to this. For example, like Lululemon now is shifting. I think they shifted too late, but I'm thankful they're switching now to brand experience stores. So no longer are they just putting a store. They'll still put stores in a mall. Yeah. But they're working way harder. It's costing them more, but they're seeing that people can go and buy stretchy black pants anywhere. You can buy them at Costco. Yep. Right? But people at Costco can't go to a place where they also offer yoga classes, and they have a nutritionist that talks about it, and maybe a naturopath, and like some, buff girls and guys that are like, whoa, they have abs and they're standing in the store and they're like coaching you. And you're like, in New York, now you can go to Lululemon and it's like, you have this whole experience.
But it's all based around community too, right? And you can feel that you're a part of that community, which again it's the whole brand piece, right? You talk about cult brands and all that kind of stuff, but really at the end of the day, you're wanting to create a community around your business and around your brand. So
why do you think car companies give you incentives? Like, you drive by any sort of there's always car streets. I don't get that. I think it's hilarious that somehow always in every city I've ever been to, there's just rows of car dealerships. It's never like one by itself, except for Tesla. Tesla will always go somewhere different. They'll do something different. They're giving a different experience, but every car company is always incentivizing you somehow to come and test drive. Because now they know it's not good enough to just look at a picture. You want to feel it. You want to feel the engine, and you need to show that off. Right. And so that's why I think it's so interesting too. Like, I'm also in the company I'm working with right now, like thinking through all of this stuff of how do we properly, and what's the best way to give a test drive of this software. Right. Right. Is a free trial the best? Is a, paid trial the best? Like, all these things that we have to think about that are going to ultimately equate to what people think of our brand, right? Because you associate these things with the brand now, right? All of the elements of the experience of using it, from the first Instagram ad they see to the first day they install it onto their computer, the first time they get it in the mail, or I know I recently interviewed the Chief Human Resources Officer of Article, which is Canada's fastest growing company. They've grown like 5 figures. Like, wow. I think it's something like 24,000%. Don't quote me on that.
That's crazy.
In 5 years. And the thing that they thought was really interesting was, over all of their experience with their customer, while their brand was growing amazingly, they still realized that what they couldn't control was the experience of the delivery of their furniture. So they actually in 3 cities now are piloting owning the supply chain on even to the delivery.
Right.
So they've realized that, wow, that experience matters. Like we can't trust FedEx or UPS to have a late delivery. We have to own that part too.
Right.
And they've taken it back. Right. Let's not trust. And it's a tough brand decision sometimes.
Right. Oh,
right?
yeah.
Everyone,
well, it's a costly one
right?
for sure. But
everyone's listening to this podcast and you have something in your brand right now that you're sort of like, do I outsource this? Do I not? Yep. How do I own this? And again, I think it comes down to the brands that survive are the ones that aren't lazy about it.
For sure.
Right?
Yep.
Find the things in your brand that you're being lazy about. I think outsourcing is one of the most destructive things for brands, especially as they're getting going.
Right.
Because it does create this sense of like, you know, almost like a high and mighty, well, we get somebody lower to do that, or we shouldn't do that. We're not going to put in the work. And again, you have to be smart. I get that. Like great leaders know how to work smart, but I also don't think that great leaders just work smart and abdicate hard work.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
I think about.
Well, and I think the other thing is, you know, some of our listeners, probably most of them, aren't running massive companies with hundreds and hundreds of employees either. And I know one thing that we had briefly talked about was how early you should start worrying about the internal spirit and the culture of your brand. I'm just curious, kind of what would you recommend to you know, a small startup or a solopreneur even when they're looking at their company culture? Yeah,
I mean, I think it's hard because, again, people have sort of said even to me, like, when can I bring you in, or should I bring you in now? And when I was thinking, I'm like, who's my ideal customer? Is it somebody that has 50 people on their team, or somebody that has 100, or someone that has 10?
Right.
And I get it. Like, you're probably not going to bring someone in, you know, to help you oversee your culture, facilitate culture discussions, all that kind of stuff when you're 5 people. But you should start to have these conversations when you're 2 people.
Right.
I think the one thing, I actually was just recently interviewed in a study about co-founders, and they wanted to hear what I had kind of observed with co-founders. And when you're 2 people, even if there's one founder and there's another person, you're still kind of co-founding the company, maybe unofficially, but
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
It's 2 people.
They're a large
there's
part
only
of
2 of you. Like this, you're the only 2. So the spirit is your 2 spirits kind of combined going at it. And those are sometimes the most intense relationships I've ever heard of.
Right.
And if they're not managed well, you will fail. And I think the biggest thing that I can encourage people to do is to start to train themselves to have confrontation early, and to remove from their mindsets that negative conversation are negative. Right. We live a world, especially in a Canadian population in Canada. I'm trying to say what we are. We live in a polite world. Right. And it actually costs us a lot of money. It's the reason why often our companies in Canada are often less successful than our American counterparts. Right. Americans are more confrontational naturally. Right. They're less polite. They don't apologize as much. Right. We know Canadians always say sorry. Yeah. But we have to be careful about that. Right. Right. It serves us as a country on an international, while we're the happy, nice people. But in our business context, we need to stop apologizing so much. And we need to start owning when we make mistakes. We need to stop beating around the bush, because it costs us money. Absolutely. It wastes time. Right? Like, and that's the one thing, like Ray Dalio, like that book Principles. I don't know if you've read it at all. I have, but I need to read it again. It's thick. I think I listened to the audiobook. It was 17 hours. Oh yeah, it's long. The audiobook. It's long. So I don't think I would have ever finished reading it. You know what's great though is Ray Dalio's Instagram account, because he'll like post random principles. It's great. I love it. Okay. But Ray Dalio, yeah, exactly. Exactly. But what I love is the idea of radical open-mindedness and radical transparency, and that being a core structure in a culture, right? And especially as leaders, I would want my employees
to come to me and go, look, this is not an efficient way to do
really
this,
good. Yeah.
right? Because that, and I've got many friends that complain that it's like, oh, this is the way this is happening at my company. It's like, why don't you talk to your superior about it? It was like, because they'll get mad. It's like, I've seen somebody else get scolded because they did that. And I'm going, well, as an employer, as a leader, as a manager, I would want to know what is going on.
Yeah.
I would want to know what's happening and how to optimize that, right? And so I completely agree. The thought of just being too kind to say this isn't working and we need to change it is just the least efficient thing that you can do.
Totally. I have two examples that are really important. One on the brand side and one on the culture side. Yeah. So on the culture side, I think definitely I want to speak to and encourage anyone that's listening to this. Inside of your company, you have to be very explicit about this. Right. So oftentimes what happens, and I've seen this time and again, that if you are a leader of a company, you make the assumption, it's very common, leaders make the assumption that they have created an environment where people can come to them and address issues. Right. Most leaders don't sit around thinking they are going to scold people. They don't plan on that. It's not their natural demeanor. It's actually rare. Right. That it happens. It does happen sometimes. So there are some leaders that if you scold people for giving you feedback, you should stop doing that and instead welcome it. But again, what most leaders rarely do is they don't explicitly ask for the feedback. Right. You need to give permission to give feedback. Right. Right. And so again, even with this morning, I was meeting with the CEO I'm working with right now, and we said, like, I blatantly disagreed with him. And he flat out said, he's like, I love that our culture, like, we fully had this conversation an hour and a half ago. Right. That he's like, I love that our culture exists in the way that there's not a hierarchy where if I disagree with you or you disagree with me, we're not afraid to discuss it. Yeah. And you make the decision afterwards and you both have to be on the same page. Yeah. Yes, there's still decision-making authority.
Well, and that's the other piece. You have to make the decision.
Right. So it's not like both can just stay. Like, someone's going to have to eventually, fold and say, okay, like, that's the decision we're going with. But fight. And I think Ray Dalio talks about this. Like, you fight with your opinion. Until you've reached a conclusion, and then your opinion no longer exists. Right.
And the opinion is also educated though too, right? That's the other piece he talks about is going, you can't just can't say it because you feel it. There's got to be evidence. There's got to be a reason behind that too. So
then on the brand side, I think this is something that people have to be very careful of. In my opinion, I could be challenged on this, but this is what I've heard and seen. Most people get so protective of their brand, their product, their software, that being open to feedback is similarly often taken as you take it offensively.
It's personal, yeah.
It's personal.
Absolutely.
And there's a coffee shop in the city, and I was at an event that they catered. And they had these sandwiches that were literally this thick, like 5 inches thick. I'm not ever exaggerating. And it was one of those events where you grabbed it was a breakfast type sandwich. Yeah. You went back to sit and you had to eat with this stacked sandwich on your lap.
Right.
And it was so horrible. Everyone was complaining about it. And like, did it taste good? Sure. But then like months later, I was in another coffee shop, not this person's coffee shop, but another person. And they were like, oh, yeah, I work at this coffee shop. And I was like, I instantly just said, oh, have you changed the height of your sandwiches yet? And it was the owner and the manager. And they both responded saying, oh, my gosh, I can't believe you would say that. Like, we're not changing those. We loved it like that. Right. And I was like, well, I was a person that ate it. And I did not have a good experience. And I'm sharing that with you. And that's your response to me saying, like, well, some people like it. Right. Well, like, to be honest, I'm pretty sure I've just validated with a group of 50 people that ate your sandwiches that when you cater events, you shouldn't serve sandwiches that big. It was, but again, they were so like offended that I would say that. Yeah. Now, you have to make a decision. Totally. They made the decision that they weren't ever going to change it. Yeah. But they weren't open to it. And that was the key thing that I was like, and for me, I was like, well, I'm not going to ever have you cater my event, you know? But again, I see this over and over again, that brands are like, they stick to their guns. And now we live in a world where agility is really what wins, right? You have to learn how to ebb and flow with what your customers say. There's always going to be customers that just complain to complain. You have to learn how to like manage that.
Yeah, but if you look at some of the biggest brands in the world, they are the ones that it's so much harder to steer and turn a massive ship like a Coca-Cola or a McDonald's.
Sure.
But they do it, and they have to be agile. Yeah. Like if McDonald's stayed the way that they were in like the 90s with Super Size Me and the whole thing, would they still be here? I don't know. But switching to the McCafe, trying to, you know, at least change the messaging, right? Like that is the thing. And you know,
and the consumer right now is the one steering.
Yeah. And it can be hard when it is your baby. You're the solopreneur, you're the small entrepreneur, and you know, you got to be that. Your business is you too. So it's, you know, it's an interesting dichotomy, an interesting battle.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really appreciate you being on the show today. I mean, it's great to talk with somebody that knows so much about company culture and also the brand and the marketing side, which is really, really great too. So is there anything that you would like to share with the audience or tell them where they can find you on social media?
So when this episode launches, we'll include a link to our free PDF.
Yes, absolutely.
It's sort of some key teaching and principles around, you know, almost like what not to do in your company culture.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Right? So we'll include that link, and it'll lead you to some hopefully helpful information that you can just start to say, okay, I think we have a good culture. How do I know if I maybe need to do some things to improve it? And that's the thing. Yeah. If there's one parting piece of advice around culture and the spirit, it's like, you can always improve on this, right? Absolutely. Just like anyone that practices some sort of form of spirituality. No one's ever arrived. Yeah. You've never gotten there. You always can do more. And I think if we can just keep that growth mindset about our brands and our company cultures, I think we'll see a lot of fruit.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for providing that to our listeners. And also, where can they find you and the Culturing Podcast?
Yeah, the Culturing Podcast on anywhere you find podcasts, wherever you're listening to this one. Actually, sometimes it's just easier to look up my name, Tynan Allan, Tynan Allan, or Culture EING.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Tynan.
You bet. Thank you, Brendan.
If you'd like to follow Tynan Allan online and follow his own journey, his website is culturing.com. That is CULTUREING.com. He's also on Instagram at Tynan Allan, and also the Culturing Podcast on social media as well. You know, I really want to thank Tynan for taking the time to be on the podcast, and I want to thank you for listening today to the first full episode of the At Heart Branding podcast. You know, if you're looking for clarity in your marketing and consistency in your branding, visit atheart.co and download the free PDF, The 5 Marketing Secrets Marketing Agencies Don't Want You to Know. It's a great resource to get you on the path to effective marketing and clear branding. That's atheart.co. So visit today. Music for this episode is by Brennan Kennedy Sound. If you're looking for a sound engineer, producer, or audio support for your event, visit BrennanKennedySound.com. We'll put the link in the description below, but that's BRENNAN Kennedy, KENNEDY, sound.com. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.